Let's talk about January 6th. So you were not really a political person prior to COVID. You become a bit more political during COVID because you were forced into it, because people basically labeled you as right wing, whether you were or not, right? I mean, anybody that was
Correct.
against the mandates and against the lockdowns or any of these things that they were doing, we were all labeled as right wing, no matter how we politically aligned prior to that. I mean, I was like a left wing progressive, and they were still calling me right wing, and I'm like, okay. And now I guess I am more right. I mean, that's kind of what happened.
No, I always thought you're correct. I always thought that the granola moms would come to my side, right?
Yeah.
Because who wants to put this foreign injection in your body? And honestly, if Trump hadn't been in office, I think the left wing would have been very anti the shot for being experimental. Because when I think about traditionally who was mocked as being anti-vax, it was always people very much on the left.
Yeah.
I mean, and in fact, the Maha movement is really from the left. So it didn't matter. They labeled me right wing, so there you go. But I was not very political.
So what happened January 6th? So you were there.
Yeah, so I was there, and I was probably the only person who was there, not because of the election. Now, it is true that I support Trump, and that is absolutely where I am, but I speak publicly on what I know, which is medical freedom, constitutional freedom. We were violating our Bill of Rights, right to assemble, right to free speech, right to worship, right, freedom of the press. I mean, all of this was being violated. So I was very offended as a lawyer, and I knew a lot as a doctor. So that was my lane. That's what I spoke on. And on January 6th, I had a permit to speak on the Capitol grounds. That's a funny little fact that people don't realize. I was actually there with a permit to speak. I was one of 20 speakers at it's called Grassy Section 8 or Section 8, which is right to the east of the Capitol building. And when I presented myself there, they didn't let us speak. I still don't know why, but there you go. They didn't let us speak. So I was on the Capitol grounds for that reason. Now, I think everyone can tell that I felt a tremendous compulsion to keep speaking on this subject. It was very upsetting to me. So I was on the top of the Capitol steps and I just was speaking, and no one could hear me because there's thousands of people there. So I quit, but I'm kind of smushed up against the wall of the
Hmm.
Capitol building. And then all of a sudden, the police officers threw a flashbang into the crowd. The crowd got pretty agitated, but no violence where I was, which was the east side. And then all of a sudden, the doors swung open from the inside. And you can see on closed circuit government TV, which I saw later, that I actually tumbled into the building. Like you can see, it wasn't really anything I intended. I didn't go to DC with any intent like that. But you can actually see that I tumble into the building because there's a crowd surge behind me. Once I was in the building, I couldn't leave, first of all, because hundreds of people keep pouring into the one entrance I saw.
Yeah.
So I decided to give my speech, and there's plenty of video of me giving my medical freedom speech in the Capitol because that seemed like a good thing to do. And perhaps it seems crazy now, but one thing you'll say is I was very consistent. I certainly wasn't there to do anything else other than to speak
Right.
on medical freedom, and that's what I was doing. And then I eventually, left the building and, went about my day. And except, it changed the whole world, right? That day. And
And you were later arrested for this and jailed?
yeah. Yeah. So, first of all, I did not appreciate at the time what a watershed moment this was for the nation. My side, where I was, the east side of the Capitol, there was virtually no video out there. The only video most people have seen is on the west side with the scaffolding, which, some pockets look not great, like Antifa people. Where
Hmm.
I was didn't look anything like that. Where I was grandmas and kumbaya. And, it was a lot of people, but it wasn't hostile in any way. So I didn't know what was coming, but we had dinner the next night with friends and they were very alarmed. And they said, when they found out I was there, they said, "Oh my God, it was an insurrection." I'm like, "What are you talking about? An insurrection?" Like it was bizarre to me. And then I got a message on my phone. One of my friends saw a picture of me on the FBI's most wanted list
Oh,
and a picture of me. And I looked at this and I said, "Well, who photoshopped this?" I mean, never
right.
did I think this was real. This is
Yeah.
really bizarre. And then I still went about my business. I had two more speaking engagements later that week. I kept them. I looked back on one that was taped, and I actually never even mentioned J6. That's what a different time it all was. I never talked about it on my speech. And then 12 days later, I was working at home, um, and I hear the most blood curdling scream in my life. I've never heard anything remotely like that. And it was the FBI breaking down my door, screaming at the top of their lungs. There was 20 officers in tactical gear with huge weapons pointed right at my chest. It was just a condo. They were maybe 6 feet from me when they burst through the door. And, you know, I see the laser sight beam light, you know, the
Oh
red
my
light on my
God.
chest. And I'm like, and it was such a moment. And then then I got my ER training kicked in and I got very calm. But they did what they did. They put me in handcuffs. They put me in shackles. They walked me in front of all the neighbors to the car. My door's broken down. They take all of my computers and phones. And I had just started this new nonprofit 6 months earlier. It was quite handicapping. They drive us over to jail. Um, and then everything that happened was really alarming to me as a lawyer. I saw due process never happened. I was never read the Miranda rights. We were held as though we were huge, like cartel members of like the El Chapo family. I mean, it was absolutely so over the top. Let's think back. What do you normally do with a person like me if you think they commit a crime? You call them, you call their lawyer. I was pretty public at that point. You don't break their door down with an FBI
Right.
arrest. And by the way, it's a very risky thing. You've told all these officers they're going to get a very violent, dangerous person, right? That's their mindset. Why else would they be there in all that tactical gear? So the odds of somebody shooting somebody is actually
Yeah.
pretty high.
Yeah.
So I think that that's kind of their plan, is to end up with a dead person. You know, a person like me would be more convenient for the government if I was dead. And then, of course, everything that happened, people know, the government went on to arrest 1,500 people. The media kept calling it an insurrection. Of course, it was never an insurrection. People who are conservative have lots of guns. If they wanted to bring guns and have a real insurrection, you would have seen one. But this was just people showing up as political protesters.
Right.
But the media and the government called us, and we were massively punished by the government. I couldn't fly. I was put on a no-fly list. I got kicked out of banks. I lost all my equipment. It was very difficult to proceed with my nonprofit. Um, Here's a little tidbit. My minor son, who had nothing to do with this, he was also put on a no-fly list. People I worked with who were married to people I worked with, like their spouses, were put on a no-fly list. I mean, it was very scary stuff. And it's a shameful moment for our
Yeah.
federal government.
So they took you
Yeah.
away. How long were you in jail?
Right. So I was in jail overnight for just 1.5 days. Quick Zoom hearing with the judge, who released me on my own recognizance, and then I was in the system for 18 months. And the other side offers me a plea deal, which, by the way, I never intended to take. I was absolutely planning to go to trial. I hadn't done anything, but turns out they were charging people like me with a 20-year felony. 20-year
Wow.
felony, 20-year felony. And this is a point that people have to hear, is that the government was so heavy-handed and they knew what they were doing. They needed to get J6 defendants to accept pleas right away, because if you didn't accept a plea, you get discovery, you get more press, and you could discern the facts. So almost everybody took a plea because we were being threatened with these 20-year felonies. I did. I changed what I did. And I know many people were like me. I couldn't face a 20-year felony. So I took a plea, and the plea I took, the government went from calling me a 20-year felon to like a minor misdemeanor. I mean, that also doesn't make sense. I mean, that's on its face inconsistent. So I took a plea for trespass. It was just a misdemeanor trespass. And when I stood before the judge was infuriated. And he took this misdemeanor trespass and he sentenced me to 60 days in prison, which was one of those moments in my life that was just shocking and overwhelming. It never occurred to me I would be incarcerated. That's unbelievable. And it was scary. It was very scary. And this is also why I wrote the book, because it is alarming that this could happen. I mean, I am as good a citizen as exists in America. You like me, you don't like me. That's true in life of everybody. But I mean, I've always been ultra law abiding, I would say, and ultra kind of compliant, climbing the to the highest heights, I would say, in America. I mean, to be a doctor and to be a lawyer, and raise good kids. I mean, that's about as good as it gets. And you could throw someone like me in prison. And by the way, Kim, they threw me in a maximum prison. So, I mean, the whole thing was so over the top. And then I started analyzing this as a lawyer and counting up all the illegal things they'd done, the prosecutors lied, the FBI. It was just so much illegality that actually propelled me to write this book, which reads honestly like a John Grisham novel. Like, you reading this and you just can't believe it, which is why there's so much factual evidence and proof I put in the book. There's
Yeah.
so many references. Like, you're going to read it and you're going to be like, well, that can't be true. And then you're like, oh no, she has all the references right here.
Is your book about
It's,
your
it's
experience specifically, or is it about, I mean, selective persecution, the legalization of American fascism? Is this about your story, or is this, what's the book about?
Yeah, this is my J6 story, but I
Yeah.
use it to explain how the infrastructure for fascism is already here. How did we get to a place where the FBI could send out a SWAT team arrest on someone that didn't meet any of their rules for sending out for a SWAT team? The rules
Yeah.
for sending out a SWAT team are prior violent history, prior gang affiliation, drugs, narcotics, violence, right? I met none of those. How did that happen? Oh, there's like something going on. How did it happen that the DC judges would call defendants in their courtroom insurrectionists when no one was charged with an insurrection? A judge is not allowed to be biased. Like, what is going on in our society that this what could have happened? We didn't get here by an accident. There were a lot of steps that had to have existed. How is it that the California Medical Board came after me for free speech? Like, there's a lot of fascist, tyrannical features of our government that have been very invisible. And my story was a really good way to show that.
Yeah. There are a lot of questions there, and how this could happen. I mean, you're bringing up such, I mean, many, without even hearing your specific case, many of us looked at what happened after January 6th and just the narrative that was around that. It was clear political persecution, and the fact that the fact that the government or just the courts or any of this can be weaponized like that is very scary, very, very scary. That it's already at that point that they were able to do that, that they were able to do that to
We
you.
we actually, when you read the book, you'll really learn things. So we had judges saying they're going to make um, we had one judge, it was a DC judge, not my case. She said that the statute did not fit what Congress said the statute should be and this defendant, but she was going to make it fit. That's literally what she said. So in the Soviet Union, the guy in charge of the KGB, I think, Beria, said, "Show me the man, I'll show you the crime." That was, he worked for Stalin. And how do you see this District of Columbia judge who literally says the statute doesn't fit, but I'm going to make it fit, and not think of that? So
Yeah.
every chapter is a feature of what happened to me, and linking it and showing how there's a lot of tyranny in America and we just haven't really seen it.
Well, you've seen it up close, unfortunately, and so for so long now. I mean, you've dealt with this now for 5 years. I mean, do you
But you
think
know,
we're turning
like,
a corner?
yes, I am. I'm actually very optimistic, if you want to know the truth. Maybe I'm a little bit, not making sense, but I am kind of optimistic. I mean, you think about my life. I mean, what are the odds being a doctor and a lawyer, and my dad was a Holocaust survivor, and a person of faith, and then I was put in this position and I could interview all these women in prison and find out what's wrong with the Bureau of Prison. And as I'm going through it, I mean, there weren't really, I think there was only one or two other lawyers that were arrested from J6. Like, so I had this kind of opportunity to see what was happening and understand it from the inside. So I personally think that, like, I was put there for a reason, as they say. And yes,
Mhm.
we've turned a corner. Maybe we needed to just have all these terrible things happen so that people wake up, right? So people have really woken up.
Thank you for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson show. If you want to watch the full show, visit KimIversonShow.com. The show airs every Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. Again, it's KimIversonShow.com. See you there.